my name is Maria Lee Schwaller, and I am Chinese. I mean, now, Chinese. I do not speak Chinese. I was not born in China, nor is Maria a traditional Chinese name, in case you didn't know. My parents are descendants of the Diuzhou or Jiaozhou people who are originally from Southeast China, although they were both born in Southwest Vietnam in a city called Rat Ra. Many people don't know this, but Diuzhou is actually a separate language from Cantonese or Mandarin, and it's called Diuzhou. It's a dying language, actually, and only 12 to 15 million people speak it today. I don't speak that either. By the time the Vietnam War ended in 1975, my parents owned a convenience store in their hometown. They were homeowners and small business owners with 2 children. My dad had fought in the army during the Vietnam War for the South. And when the South lost, he had to burn or bury all of his clothes so that the Communist Party wouldn't know that he fought against them. I imagine he would have been put into a re-education camp, or worse, killed if they did. By 1979, they had 2 more children. It was then that their business and home were confiscated by the North Vietnamese Communist Party, and they were forced to leave everything behind and flee the country. They were around 40 years old. That's the same age I am now. I think about that a lot, especially now that I have children of my own. Imagine having to pick up my entire life and my entire family and leave the country that I knew I grew up in. My parents, along with their 4 children, my grandfather and his 2 wives, yes, you heard that right, 2 wives living together, they did just that. The people in this mass exodus would later be known as the Vietnamese boat people, a term used to describe refugees who fled Vietnam by sea following the end of the Vietnam War. Migration was highest between 1978 and 1979. That was around the time that my family had left. And over the next 15 years, about 800,000 people were relocated safely to new countries, and another 200 to 400,000 would never see land again, having faced danger from pirates, diseases, starvation, overcrowded boats, storms, you name it. Some historians actually believe this number is even higher. The ship that my family was on, they were told, was one of the last refugee boats to Malaysia. It typically held 200 to 300 passengers, and on their particular trip, it held 600 passengers. On their journey, they too would face danger from pirates, diseases, starvation, and storms. And my mom had to sew money into random parts of her body, into pockets to hide it from pirates. At least 2 people died on the ship that they knew of. The dead were wrapped up and thrown overboard. And all things considered, my parents felt very lucky since they had heard stories of other families and knew other families leaving on much smaller boats only to have them all die. And even though they brought what they could onto the ship, they couldn't take it all with them when they reached the shore. My mom often associates living in the refugee camp with one very, very long camping trip. At the camp, they had to wash all their clothes and use the restroom in the ocean. Needless to say, sanitation in the crowded conditions was the greatest problem. Food and drinking water had to be imported by barge and consisted mostly of coffee and rice. The refugees constructed shelters from boat timbers, plastic sheeting, flattened tin cans, palm fronds, whatever they could find on the beach. They couldn't communicate with anyone outside of camp because of the language barrier. My mom asked a stranger if they had spare clothes, but they didn't speak the same language. She finally met someone who spoke Cantonese, which was similar enough where she could understand the language. And that person told her that if she knew how to sew, she could come over and get clothes. So my mom left that person's house with 2 bags full. But before returning to camp, she was stopped by policemen who threatened to take her clothes unless she gave them $100. So, feeling like she had no choice, she paid them off. She gave clothes to people who didn't have it. She kept a few for herself and her kids. Overall, my family spent about 14 months in that refugee camp. During that time, my grandfather passed away. He's still buried there. At the same time, my mom also got pregnant with my older sister. She was about 7 months pregnant, ready to start a new life in America when she was told that she should wait to give birth in Malaysia before coming to the US. Why? Because she would have to pay all of the hospital bills. And there was no way they could do that. They left nearly everything behind in Vietnam and didn't have much left. They thought about sending my dad and the other kids ahead, and my mom would stay behind until after she gave birth to my sister. But since they already had their resettlement papers and their IDs, they all decided to stay together as a family. So about 4 weeks after my sister was born, they finally got on a plane and landed in Los Angeles, California. So by the time I was born, around December of 1981, they were settled for about a full year and a half in this new country. They had found a group of Gaikinang people, which is a term that they use to call their people, and they felt almost at home immediately. There was a Chinatown, there were Chinese stores, there were Chinese doctors, Chinese groceries, Chinese restaurants, Chinese barbershops, Chinese temple association, you name it. They just felt at home. They didn't need to assimilate into the traditional American culture as we know it. My parents found their people. In fact, they never even quite learned English. My mom never learned how to drive. My parents never changed their names. We never celebrated any of the traditional American holidays. There was no Christmas, no 4th of July, no Memorial Day, no Thanksgiving. Instead, we had Chinese New Year, and we had moon festivals, and we had Chinese Day of the Dead. They never even got a job that was on the books. I was born 2 weeks past my mom's due date with the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. I had to stay in the hospital for over 2 weeks. And my mom told me she would visit me every day, but she didn't want to hold me. She later told me she didn't want to get too attached and had come to terms about me dying in the hospital. Turns out my parents had another baby, a boy, around 1974 or 75. This would be about the time the Vietnam War ended. And my mom had left the baby in the hospital overnight, and he passed away. So she never talks about it. She never even tells us whether or not he had a name. All she knows or remembers is that the war had ended. Nurses were busy taking care of all the soldiers. There was nobody left to take care of her baby. Obviously, the conditions were different in Los Angeles, and one day the hospital staff told my parents that they could take me home. So here they were with their new baby girl, the youngest of their 7 children. My parents wanted to give their new baby an American name. After all, I was born in America. I'm the American-born daughter. In fact, throughout my life, my parents would often introduce me to their friends as their American-born daughter. This is my American-born daughter, Maria. I think it was their own way of assimilation, actually, by introducing me as their American-born daughter. They asked their friends and family, who didn't speak English either, about giving me an American name. They said, "Oh, we have this American-born daughter. We need to give her an American name." So around the time they looked around their neighborhood was Los Angeles, and it's mostly Hispanic. And there are a lot of girls named Maria. Shocking. So they said, "Oh, Maria must be an American name. We shall name our American-born daughter Maria." That is how I got my name. So these days, I often reflect on my family and my culture. Maybe it's because they're all in Los Angeles and I don't get to see them as often. Maybe it's because I miss my mom's cooking. Maybe it's because of the variety of food that I miss in LA as well. Maybe it's because for the first time I look around and notice that no one looks like me. Or that when my son was playing soccer, he was the only boy who was not blonde on the team. Having moved away from everything I knew about my Chinese heritage, I feel the need to hold on to it even more. I remind my kids that they're half Chinese, and I show them what it means to me. Eating foods I grew up eating, egg rolls, chow mein, celebrating Chinese New Year, getting red envelopes, all the exciting things. My daughter is excited right now. They even learned their Chinese zodiac sign and what that means. And by showing them, I'm also reminding myself that I'm not the American born daughter. I'm actually the Chinese daughter who happened to be born in America. Thank you.